think back to the last conversation you had about millennials, probably went something like this. Ugh, they're always on their phones. They never buy real estate. They eat avocado toast. Not without photographing it first. They're always posting selfies. They've created their own distinct shade of the color pink. They're lazy, they're entitled, they're impatient. They don't understand the value of hard work. They move back in with their parents, and it's all because they were raised on participation trophies. Spoiler alert, I'm a millennial. What I see is empowerment like none other. We don't just sit back and complain or accept the status quo. We roll up our sleeves and get to work our way. We're entrepreneurs, we're problem solvers, and we get stuff done. Millennials have all of the characteristics necessary to defeat the stigma surrounding mental health. Asking for help is a sign of strength, not a weakness, and we're on a mission to make it known. Take one of my friends, for example. He and I met in undergrad. I'd begun my advocacy work, he'd noticed, and he reached out to let me know that an article we'd posted about Robin Williams' suicide made him realize that he too had been struggling with depression for years. Fast forward, and he's now working an entry-level job in the media industry. If you've ever watched a video that's been edited to remove graphic content, you should thank him. He had to watch it over and over again to make sure it turned out that way. Having to do this, on top of fighting depression, leaves him crying in his car on his way home from work. Obviously, hearing this breaks my heart. So I ask him, does the company know? And do they offer therapy to help offset the effects of this work? And he abruptly replies, no. And if I make a fuss, I won't advance. I'm dispensable. There are dozens of people out there waiting to replace me. He knows he has a problem, but he's determined not to let it affect his career. So he just muddles through. Another one of my friends serves in the military. Knowing that mental health is kind of my thing, he was excited to share with me about the counseling services available on base. I was thrilled to hear that our armed forces have access to these resources. The more we got to know each other, the more he began to share with me about a rough patch he'd been going through. So I suggested he check out some of those counseling services he'd mentioned. His response was the same. No, if anybody sees me go in there, or if they check my records to see that I've gone, I won't advance. The military wouldn't want me if they thought something was wrong with me. Here are two millennials I know who know that it shouldn't be this way, and yet they still have to operate within a flawed system. They're employed in different industries with different struggles, but the same reluctance to reach out for help, worried that it might negatively impact their careers. That's the stigma, folks. Part of the problem is that everything out there makes mental health sound dire. We see it depicted in stock photos of miserably sad-looking humans, as a crying rock in an antidepressant commercial. And I get it. That's certainly part of the experience. But it's not helping anyone. Nobody wants to be the sad rock. And if you don't want to identify with something, you'll probably deny that it's affecting you. Regardless of how many times you've heard someone say it, you can't just snap out of it or get over it. Mental health issues need treatment. It's one thing to be sick. It's another thing to hate yourself for being sick, or to think of yourself as weak, or to worry about whether or not somebody else views you as weak. And that's the problem we need to be talking about. The struggle is real, and so is the stigma. A diagnosis is one thing, but the labels crazy, mad, nuts, psycho that accompany it are often worse. We inherited this stigma from our grandparents' generation, who denied that mental health was even a thing. Our parents were the ones who began to acknowledge it, but they'd disappear for an hour on a random Thursday to talk to a therapist and didn't tell anyone. Our generation, though, is different. Perhaps it's social media and the digital age of oversharing, but we're telling you what we ate for lunch and where we disappeared to on that Thursday. By us sharing that 1, we're in pain, 2, these things are real, and 3, they're affecting us, we've showed up and tried to make this part of the collective consciousness. There's something about human nature that makes us feel that there's strength in numbers, and there are statistics to prove it. You're not alone. 1 in 4 American adults will deal with a mental health issue at some point in their lifetime. That's 61.5 million people. And while that number is huge, the real number is far larger because most will go untreated due to stigma and therefore unreported. That's what's killing us, the stigma. It's keeping us from reaching out for the help that we need, and then it's skewing our statistics so we don't have an accurate grasp on the magnitude of the problem. Meanwhile, the Center for Disease Control estimates that only 17% of American adults can be considered to be in a state of optimal mental health at any given time. 17%. So, why do millennials care so much about mental health? Well, we're currently in the stage of life that's filled with transitions. And the sweet spot for when the onset of many of these diseases will occur is late teens, early 20s. Do you realize that there's a span of like 10 years where you're supposed to figure out what you want to be when you grow up, then grow up, find a job, pursue a passion, pay back the loans you took out to get the education you needed to do said passionate job, find a soulmate, mate, and then get back to work? What? If you can't say it in one breath, then maybe it's too much. And that's what we're up against. Mental health issues result as a mixture of genetics and environment. And it's those kinds of pressures that tend to bring out the symptoms of anxiety and depression. Everybody's so busy projecting this picture-perfect image, and it's also misleading. And that feeling of isolation is the worst. By the time I was a sophomore in college, I'd had enough conversations to recognize that my peers were all just as confused and overwhelmed as I was. I met with the dean and pitched him an idea I had to drum up awareness about mental health resources available for free on our campus. He told me to join something pre-existing and make change from the inside. Let me tell you, nothing motivates a millennial more than being told no. So, by the time classes started again in the fall of 2013, my friends and I had a nonprofit called Stronger Than Stigma. It's a for us, by us social movement dedicated to mental health advocacy for millennials. We wanted to hold space for people where there was no pressure to be anything but yourself, where you'd feel understood and accepted for all that you are. It didn't exist when we needed it, so we knew we'd have to create it. We're all about breaking down the barriers that keep people from reaching out for help. We had lived experience, and we knew that when a student begins to feel depressed, stressed, or not quite like themselves, they talk to a friend. And that's what was missing from the equation, a millennial support network, something you could belong to that made you feel like you weren't alone. I'm here today because I want you to know that you can make a difference in your everyday life, and we need you to. Dr. Seuss said it best. Unless someone like you cares a whole awful lot, nothing is going to get better. It's not. It's not enough anymore to just start the conversation. That was so 2013. It's time now to redirect the conversation, to focus on dialogue that ends misinformation, myths, and misunderstanding. Whether you realize it or not, the things you say are perpetuating the stigma. Don't worry, I can help you with that. You have the power to choose your words and to use them for good, to promote empathy and understanding. Here are 3 life hacks to help you fight stigma in your day-to-day life. First, be kind with your words with regards to mental health. Stop joking about it. For the love of all that's good and right in the world, stop saying the weather is bipolar. It isn't. If our only impressions of mental health are negative, then of course nobody wants to be associated with it. Second, stop letting snarky comments slide. Your silence fuels the stigma. If you find yourself cringing in conversation when a friend stereotypes the mentally ill, even responding with, "Dude, that's not cool," is better than just nodding and waiting for the next topic. That's your moment to make actionable change. Third, if you know someone who's struggling and you find yourself searching for the right words, wanting to be supportive but not knowing what to say, my best advice is don't say anything. Stop trying to fix. Listen instead. Literally, all you have to do is show up. It's the most undervalued job in the world. And let me reassure you, if it feels awkward, then you're doing it right. Don't give up on that person. They need you. Assure them you're there, and then just be there, in the same room, on the same couch, whatever it is. Occupying the same space is enough. Lastly, if you are struggling, please stop assuming you're bumming people out. You are not a burden. When your brain is sick and your thoughts have taken you as prisoner, you're engaged in battle. Struggling is exhausting. And while your parents, friends, and partners may never see that battle, I know that you are putting forth a huge amount of effort. You're probably saying things like, "I don't know how you still love me," or "I'm sorry I'm like this." I know you don't feel like yourself, and you're worried they might not recognize you either. But the person they love is still in there. It's still you. I know you don't want to weigh your people down, so you're keeping to yourself, but you have to invite them in. That's the only way they can help you through it. It takes time, so you'll have to wait it out, but you can do it. This just got very real. And you might be asking yourself, how does she know? Well, that person with those thoughts and fears, that was me. I was 17 the first time I started saying those things and feeling that way. Before then, I thought anxiety and depression were just more descriptive words for worry and sadness. I didn't know they were medical conditions or even how to recognize my own symptoms. I'm still working on owning my story. I know what it feels like to feel like there's no way you'll possibly make it to the final bell of the school day, let alone to the next chapter of your life. If that's you now, know that I hear you and I'm working for you. We can't stop until we're living in a world without stigma. We'll know we've made it when asking for help is celebrated and when saying you're not on your A game isn't the end of the world. When the totality of the human experience isn't feared, but managed instead. When no one has to choose between their mental health and a promotion at work. And when there's no longer a right answer to the question, how are you? You don't have to be good all the time. Whatever's been done before us hasn't cut it. We millennials know it, so we started this movement. But it's time now for everybody to join in. Together, all of us are stronger than stigma. Thank you.